Hi, and thank you for joining me at my session of Pakistan Dreaming on Marketing Cloud for Salesforce admins. This session is aimed at Salesforce admins who are familiar with the Salesforce terminology, but are interested to know more about Marketing Cloud. So it's all through that lens. So if you're familiar with Salesforce and the way that that's structured, I'm going to lead you through how you can move on to Marketing Cloud and some of the differences that you should be aware of. Now, if you haven't learned Salesforce, I hope that you'll still take something from this session, maybe a little bit about Salesforce and also a little bit about Marketing Cloud. What we're not going to do in this session is go into deep dive tutorials, but this is mainly about talking to you about how Salesforce core is structured and then the things and the considerations you need to make as you're moving over and starting your journey with Marketing Cloud. So in this session, first of all, I'm going to start about some context and tell you about how Marketing Cloud has evolved. And then I'm going to talk to you about the core messaging products that most people might be familiar with. And in there, I'll talk about the studios and the builders, and then signpost areas in Trailhead where you can find some more information. I'll talk about some of the characteristics of the clouds and with a particular highlight on how they differ. Then I'll go into a little bit more about data management and access within Marketing Cloud. And then we'll talk about the key processes and how they potentially differ and some of the key processes you need to be aware of for Marketing Cloud. And then we'll talk about trust. And that really covers permission-based marketing and also a concept that is around Marketing Cloud is deliverability. And then finally, I'll signpost some resources if you're interested to find out more. So firstly, a little bit about me and why I'm talking about this. So I've been in and around the Salesforce ecosystem now for probably over 15 years. I started off with Salesforce as an accidental admin, working as a marketeer, working within an organization where they put in Salesforce. And then as I transitioned on my journey, moving into consultancy and then into larger consultancies, I had the opportunity to work with Marketing Cloud, which I was really excited about because I had some marketing background and I wanted to apply those particular skills. So in that time, I've been quite active in the Salesforce community. I'm a Salesforce MVP. I have a number of certifications, including all the certifications related to marketing. I'm also one of the co-leads of the London Marketing Cloud user groups, and I also get involved in some of the community conferences, including London's Calling and Salesforce. But the reason I want to talk about this topic is because these are some of the things that I wish had been sort of explicitly pointed out to me when I started on my Marketing Cloud journey. So let's start with the context. And within that, I'm going to start talking about how Marketing Cloud has evolved. So really, Marketing Cloud is an acquisition story. So you can see from the slide here that there are a number of different logos of organizations that span over the last 20 years. So as many of you probably know, Salesforce started in 1999, but in parallel, ExactTarget, which was an email marketing automation tool, also was started in 2000. Now, these tools ran in parallel for a number of years, and both of them made acquisitions. So when it relates to ExactTarget, they bought Keychain and CoTweet, and they also bought Pardot and Go Digital over a period of time. And then in parallel, Salesforce also bought Radian6 and Buddy Media. Now, Radian6 and Buddy Media eventually came what we would see now as Social Studio. And then Salesforce also bought ExactTarget, which also brought Pardot into the family. And the combination of those tools make up the core messaging product that we'll understand as part of the Marketing Cloud portfolio that we see today. There has been some additional purchases. So Crux, which became Salesforce DMP, which was then also became Salesforce 360 Audiences, and now is in a situation where it's being retired. More recently, Datorama and Rebel Email, which is the technology that makes up the interactive email function of the Marketing Cloud messaging product. And then more recently, we've seen Evergage, which now powers Salesforce CDP and the CMO Club. And most recently, I would imagine all of you are aware that there has been a purchase of Slack. And I think at Dreamforce that we'll be understanding more about how Slack can be used by marketeers and within the Marketing Cloud journey. So that should be an exciting development, which we'll hear about at Dreamforce. But as you can see, there have been a number of different products that have been involved in actually making up the portfolio of tools which come under the Marketing Cloud umbrella. And as such, they are built on slightly different technologies. So unlike Salesforce Core, which was designed and built by Salesforce from the ground up with the same architecture and the same principles, we will notice that this acquisition story has an impact on how Marketing Cloud behaves. So if we talk a bit more about the products, as I mentioned, Marketing Cloud is really sort of an umbrella term that covers a number of different products. Now, these can be divided into two areas. You've got your data products and your messaging products. So we can see here a number of the different products that are available. So we've got things like DMP and Data Studio, which you might be more familiar with the names of 360 Audiences, and then also Google Analytics. And then we've also got some of the messaging-based tools. So that will include functionality such as Journey Builder, Interaction Studio, the email and mobile studios, which are some of the most commonly used tools, and then advertising and social studio. More recently, we will have seen the Salesforce DMP product, which again we're going to hear a lot more about in the future. And also we have Pardot. So in that setting, the tools that I have mentioned foremost are particularly around a B2C environment, although not exclusively, whereas Pardot is more focused on the B2B environment, particularly where there's a more in-depth personal selling environment. Now, that doesn't mean that these tools aren't applicable to, the alternative B2B or B2C, but as a general rule, they fit those use cases more. So as we can see from here, that we've got DMP, Datorama, and Google Analytics 360 as your data products, along with Salesforce CDP. And then also we're more recently seeing Customer 360 Manager as a means of combining and unifying all of these different profiles. So these make up the data products. And then you've got your messaging products, of which Pardot also falls into. But as this is predominantly targeted at admins, so those are the super users within the system, it's good to highlight actually how the role of an admin and also the role of end users differs between the two products. So there are commonalities between the two. So when it comes to admins, you have fewer admins than you have end users in both of the systems. Admins have full system access. They do a lot of the user management, and they also have declarative development tools available along with programmatic tools. And they also monitor the health of the platform and are responsible for how that is behaving on a day-to-day basis. In terms of end users, as with both tools, they all require a license. So then if we come into Salesforce in a bit more detail, so as an admin on the Salesforce platform, you would design and build processes, and that would be using tools like Process Builder and Flow. And if you've been in and around the platform for a number of years, that would also include Workflow. And they also monitor adoption. So adoption is a key area within the Salesforce core platform, as you have a number of end users and the information and the data in the system is only as good as it is when it's updated, and therefore you have many people going in and making sure that that's current. So with end users, in the Salesforce core platform, you can have many end users. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, but it can be possible to have thousands of users or tens of thousands of users in a Salesforce instance. Typically, there'll be a proportion of those people that are manually entering data. And you could have many people who are part of the same team that perform a similar set of tasks. And typically, a lot of these users have customer interaction. They are talking to people, they are moving records on, they are moving records through a process. This is typically individual records. They're updating data on a daily basis. They're creating data on a daily basis. Within Marketing Cloud, again, you have this separation of admins and end users. But admins within Marketing Cloud have much more of a focus on data and data integration. So Marketing Cloud is a platform where you're working with large volumes of data. It's the reason that you purchase a marketing automation tool in the first place, is to be able to communicate with people at scale. So you have large volumes of data, and as such, Marketing Cloud is not typically a system where that data originates. So it takes that data from other sources, and therefore, as an admin, you would be very much involved in understanding where the source systems for the data that you need for your marketing activities are coming from. And you'd also be involved in making sure that that data comes into the system in a timely manner that is appropriate for the types of messaging and the activities that you're trying to take place. So unlike Salesforce Core, it is possible to have a Salesforce instance which isn't actually connected to many other systems. But within Marketing Cloud, it's typical that your instance of Marketing Cloud is connected to at least one other source, maybe multiple, maybe your data warehouse, maybe it's pulling in feeds of data from many different places. Admins are also responsible for designing and building processes and structure within the system. So in much the same way that they would be with Salesforce Core, marketing has various processes, and an admin might be responsible for supporting those processes and building those in a scalable way. But also, unlike Salesforce Core, admins might also be or are responsible for building the structure in the system. So when you start with a brand new version of Marketing Cloud, in terms of data and the way that your content assets are stored, all of that is a blank piece of paper. You start with one root folder, and where you go from there, how you structure your data is dependent on the admin for them to understand how their organization works and then structure it in an appropriate way that supports that particular business. So in Salesforce Core, you would find that much of that structure already exists. So when you go into the setup area, you'll already have, your separation between standard and custom objects. And in there, they've got certain names, you find things in certain places, data is stored in specific areas and monitored in different areas. Whereas Marketing Cloud, that is all up for the definition by the admin. And therefore that can be extremely powerful because it allows you to structure your environment in a way that works for you. Or it can be quite confusing and it can be in some cases problematic. So in some examples, the system grows organically. You have multiple users, people create different folders for their own requirements, and the system can get quite unwieldy and sometimes a little bit out of control quite quickly. So it's important here that the admin also has a focus on structure and that there are strong sort of governance processes to ensure that the system is growing and scaling in a way that works for the organization. With end users, you find that actually there are far fewer end users in Marketing Cloud than there typically would be in Salesforce Core. Now, the role of the end user is different, i.e. the people that are end users are not typically having one-to-one direct customer interaction. They're not going in and creating data records manually. In fact, they're consuming the information that has come in via the automated integrations, or in some cases, the batch integrations. Now, these types of end users might also be designing processes, because they might be designing email campaigns that are subtly different each time. They might be designing customer journeys, so they're different each time. So in this instance, the level of understanding that an end user needs to have in Marketing Cloud and their ability to access potentially the automation tools is much higher than it would be for an end user in the Salesforce core platform. It also means that their level of data access is typically much higher. So within the core platform, you might actually reduce down the types of data that end users can see. Whereas for end users in Marketing Cloud to be truly effective, they typically need access to a wide range of data so that they can build campaigns that are appropriate and also test those campaigns across different audience segments. Because end users are working with so much data, they also need to have some data manipulation skills. And we'll come on to the skill set in terms of Marketing Cloud later. But as you can see, the types of activities that end users get involved in Marketing Cloud are slightly different than they would be in Salesforce Core. And there are typically fewer of those users. But that doesn't mean that there can't be instances where there are large numbers of end users who are carrying out lots of very similar tasks, particularly in a large enterprise setting where millions of emails are being sent per day and email campaigns are being created every day. Then you would have a large subset of end users creating that content. But typically, the end users in Marketing Cloud are people that are designing the campaigns. So you need one or two people that are responsible for that. But then through those campaigns that they design, they're able to touch and interact with millions of people without needing a high number of users. So let's talk about the core messaging product. I'm going to break this down into sort of simple building blocks. There is some more complexity here. I hope that this interests you, and then I will signpost areas where you can find out more information. So first of all, let's start off with some core building blocks, and we'll talk about the studios. So the studios are workspaces in Marketing Cloud, which predominantly focus on channels. So within here, you'll see Email Studio, Mobile Studio, and Advertising Studio, and also Web Studio. And in here, they effectively allow you to work in that particular channel that you can see referenced. So within Email Studio, that's where you would go to send emails. And in Mobile Studio, that's where you would go to send mobile messages and WhatsApp messages. And these channels broadly mean that people that work in those particular specialisms can work in those particular areas. And in addition to the studios, we also have what's called builders. So builders are workspaces that provide capability that span across the studios. So you've got this sort of matrix effect here. So you've got Email Studio, Mobile Studio, and then you've got Contact Builder. So Contact Builder is where you go and design and build your contact model. And then this contact model is available across all the different studios. And as we're talking about a central person and a connected journey, then you would want to be operating off the same data with the same data model. You've then got Content Builder. So this is where you can go and build and create all your content assets in here. And again, these can be reusable across studios. So for example, if you were loading in some imagery or you were writing some text or in copy, then you might want that available in multiple places so that there is a consistent messaging across all the different channels. So that's where you would go in there and create content in Content Builder. And then you've got Journey Builder, which is the workspace where you create messaging automation. So Journey Builder is the primary place now that you go to create messaging journeys, and you can access the different channels in those journeys, bringing that all together. So you would select an audience, and then you would be able to actually communicate with that audience across multiple channels. So that's where we have that matrix effect. So in terms of data and bringing data in, within Marketing Cloud, all data is contained in either data extensions or lists. So during this talk, I'll predominantly focus on data extensions because this is the way to capture data when you're working with large scales of data. And within that, so data extensions are available across all the different studios, and you might predominantly work with data extensions in Contact Builder because that's where you go to with the data. But what we'll see illustrated here is a number of different ways that you can bring data into Marketing Cloud. So that's either through the connection with Salesforce, of which there is an App Exchange product that you can install that will bring data from Salesforce Core directly into Marketing Cloud. Or alternatively, you can use the Marketing Cloud SFTP site. So this is an SFTP site which is specifically provided with the Marketing Cloud product that is linked directly to the tool, which you can drop data in, and then you can bring directly into the Marketing Cloud using some automation techniques. And then you've got an API. So you've got both a SOAP and REST API that you can use. And if you needed to integrate with other external systems and you needed that data in real time, then you can build those integrations using the API. So that's a simple way of boiling down the tool to understand how that might work. And just to give you an overview, now this is predominantly just the messaging product. And I mean, you'll see that there are definitely some things missing here. So this is a much more simplified view. So we haven't talked about sort of Interaction Studio or how CDP might interact with the tools. We also haven't touched on other things that you might have heard about, like Social Studio or Automation Studio, but this just gives you some fundamental building blocks. So if this has got you somewhat interested in this area, then you can definitely get in and find out more information from Trailhead. So there are lots of great resources that have been created here now. So we're not going to go into that in any more detail, but I encourage you to really get into the Trailhead and understand more about studios and builders. So this is just some links on builders. So now if we talk about some of the characteristics, so you've got Marketing Cloud versus Salesforce Core. So how exactly do these differ? Okay, so here I've pulled out 6 areas that I think is really interesting to understand about, all that really come under the architecture banner. So as I highlighted, Marketing Cloud has very much been built from an acquisition journey. And what that means is that, you know, each one of the tools that they've purchased and brought together, in some cases is in one particular tool, all had a different architecture when it was first developed. And obviously work has gone on to harmonize that and to bring that together into a cohesive tool. However, it is worth knowing that actually because of that, there are subtle differences in the behavior. So to start with, Marketing Cloud won't necessarily behave in the same way that you would expect Salesforce Core. Now, Salesforce Core has been designed and built by Salesforce with their proprietary architecture, and the way that that tool is built over time has all been within the control and the planning within the Salesforce development team. Whereas within Marketing Cloud, say, for example, Email Studio and Mobile Studio and equally Social Studio will all have built in a slightly different way, and then in some cases brought together. Now, in some cases that's under the same product heading, and in other cases it's more of a visual integration so that you can get to those tools from the same homepage, but they actually have different user licenses and different ways that they operate. And the reason that this is important is just that it's reasonably important not to make any assumptions about how something might work. So an example being that the reporting, or at least the legacy reporting that was available on Email Studio, might not be quite as comparable as the reporting that was available on Mobile Studio. Another area to be mindful of is that actually the Salesforce instances and the Marketing Cloud instances are actually hosted in different locations. So again, there'll be some crossover here, but if data residency is really important to you as an organization, and maybe you work in an organization that has some heavy restrictions, such as finance, or pharmaceutical or medical, and you really need to understand exactly where your data is, then you want to be asking those questions, particularly about Marketing Cloud, and not just making the assumption that they're going to be hosted in the same location as Service and Salesforce Core. And in this particular instance, so Salesforce runs on an Oracle database, and at least the messaging product for Salesforce Marketing Cloud runs on Microsoft SQL. So they are, in entirely different technology stacks. Now, these might be located at the same place, but again, it's important to ask these questions. So, for example, I can tell you that the stack for marketing in Europe is stack number 50. But there aren't necessarily as many of those. So if, for example, you were based in the UK and you wanted to make sure that your data was specifically in Europe, then you would want to be asking the questions and making sure that your Marketing Cloud instance had been built in the location that works for you. The next, I come on to the build process. So I'm sure many of you that have started on a Marketing Cloud journey will be very aware that if you wanted to get a version of Salesforce to practice on or look at, you can go online, fill in a form, and you can get a dev org within 5 minutes. And that gives you an environment that you can go in and test and learn. Whereas Marketing Cloud is not the same. It's not possible to get a comparable dev org, and that is because the way that Marketing Cloud is built is different, and therefore is not scalable in the same way that it is for Salesforce Core. There's a manual element to that process, which again means that when it comes to provisioning and those sort of things, it can take just a little bit longer. It also means that the people who have Marketing Cloud environments are pretty much either just commercial customers or partners. And it's just something to be aware of when you first start with Marketing Cloud and your organization starts with Marketing Cloud, is that you just want to go in and make sure that everything is set as you were expecting it to be, and it's in the location that you were expecting it to be, because there are some manual elements in there, which means some different choices can be made. Now, next, I'm going to talk about the visual customization that you can do. So within Salesforce Core, you'll be very familiar with the fact that, since I think 2008, we've had the ability to modify what the user interface looks like for end users using Visualforce. and now more recently using Lightning Web Components, so that actually you can customize the experience specifically for your users, so it focuses on those tasks. Now, as I highlighted with users, that actually we don't have the same volume of users and they don't engage with the system in quite the same way in Marketing Cloud. And equally, we don't have the ability to actually customize the user interface as we would do in Salesforce. And so you have options to turn off pieces of functionality so that removes people's access to them, but it doesn't actually remove them from the user interface, and it doesn't allow, as an admin, to be able to tailor the particular work environment specifically to the way that your end users might want to work. Now, that isn't a significant barrier in the same way that it would be in Salesforce, but it's just worth knowing that, you know, this is another area where there are some differences. In terms of the environment, so within Salesforce Core, we're very familiar with having various different orgs. So you might have a production environment, and then you might have potentially multiple sandboxes that relate to those. And within each of those settings, the people that have access to those particular environments will have a different set of logins. So they'll have a different username and a different password, and you can tightly control who has access to what environments based on the fact that they are entirely separate instances. Within Marketing Cloud, you will have one instance, right? So, and that will be referred to as your tenant. And within that, you can create different environments and different workspaces, which are referred to as business units, but if you are accessing or have access to different business units, you will do that through the one login. So you will always have one login for Marketing Cloud typically, and then if you are using, for example, business units as staging or testing environments, it will still be through that one login, but just through a different set of setup in terms of user management that allows you to see various different workspaces. So that again is a key difference. And then also Marketing Cloud actually has some additional sort of add-in options. So within Marketing Cloud, you've got the concept of a business rule. Now that is, they're a set of switches or toggles in the back end of Marketing Cloud, like when it's being provisioned and set up, that Salesforce as an organization can turn on and off to allow the capability to be shown in your Marketing Cloud environment. So for example, there is a business rule which turns off email sending or turns on email sending. And there are many different options within there, of which there can either dramatically or subtly change the behavior of Marketing Cloud. So if you are in your Marketing Cloud environment and it is not, you can't get access to some functionality that you think that you are entitled to, or you've seen explained somewhere, then it's always useful to get in touch with Salesforce support to find out if actually there is a business rule that is either on or off, which is allowing you to see that particular piece of functionality. Next, we'll talk about the terminology. So again, I've touched on some of these in the conversation that we've had before. So in terms of environments, the sort of words that we'd be looking for there are orgs and sandboxes, which you should be familiar with. But within Marketing Cloud, we'd be more talking about tenants. So that is your sort of master environment, and then business units, which are, you know, workspaces within that tenant environment that you can create for different purposes. So that might be because you have multiple brands and you want to keep the users and the workings of those separately, or it might be because you want to have a staging area and a test area and a development area within your Marketing Cloud instance in order to facilitate sort of rapid and robust development. In terms of the data structure, within Salesforce, we are familiar with objects and fields. And within Marketing Cloud, we actually capture data in data extensions, and what we would describe as the fields or columns on those are typically referred to as attributes. So they are not quite the same as objects in Salesforce, although they perform a very, very similar task. So a data extension is analogous to a table. And within each of those, for each data extension you create all the different fields that you might want for the data that's available. With security, we have the options of profiles, and then, an extension of that is the permissions and permission sets. So those control what people can do within the system. And then we also have roles. And within Salesforce Core, roles control the data that people can see, depending on the sharing model. Where within Marketing Cloud, we just have the concept of roles. So your user license will be given a certain set of permissions via your role, but that then controls what you can do. And unlike Salesforce, is not quite the same with the same terminology, which controls what you can see. And then equally with the data model, we've got contacts and accounts as some of the primary places where data is modeled within Salesforce, whereas actually the terminology is subtly different with the data model in Marketing Cloud. So we're talking about contacts, which obviously is, very analogous, but has just some subtle differences, and then also subscribers. So that is a sort of subset of the contact functionality. And in this instance, you'll find that actually within Marketing Cloud, we don't really have so much of a concept of accounts, because again, in many cases, Marketing Cloud is used in a B2C environment where actually mapping organizations is not as required. So if we come on to the data model approach, something I just want to call out here is that actually within Salesforce Core, the data model is typically account-centric. So Salesforce originated as a B2B tool, and therefore organizations were at the center of the way that they modeled data, and contacts were people that worked at organizations. And obviously over time that's evolved to allow for the person account, which works more in a B2C setting. But typically within Salesforce, everything starts with an account, and then you have the contacts underneath that. Whereas Marketing Cloud and really most other marketing automation tools actually puts the contact at the very center of the model. And it says that this is, the primary entity that we'll be interacting from, and everything else is related specifically to that. Now, in a lot of cases, that doesn't really make a huge amount of difference when you're using Marketing Cloud, but there are certain use cases that it can become an area where admins need to give a lot more thought. And these are around areas where, the business might be working on a household model basis. So actions and data centers around an account, but actually within a marketing automation tool, they want to communicate specifically with a contact. And where this needs more thought is that a person can actually be related to many of these different households. So for example, if it's in a utility setting, a person might be a landlord of multiple different buildings, but the building is what is modeled. And therefore there are some subtle behaviors in the way that the contact needs to be handled, how they are communicated with, how often they are communicated with, and how independently they are communicated with, that need some extra considerations. So when working with Marketing Cloud, always have that in the back of your mind. So now if we go on to data management So now let's briefly talk about the skills. So in here, you can see that with both tools, you have declarative development, which is great, particularly when you're starting out. In terms of data manipulation within Salesforce, we've got SOCL and SACL, right? So these are loosely based on SQL, but they are the Salesforce proprietary query languages, and therefore have some subtle Salesforce nuances to them. In terms of logic, that would be written with Apex, and then through visual manipulation, you would historically be using Visualforce. And then we also, in more recent years have skills related to building Lightning Web Components, which is your JavaScript, your CSS, and your HTML, which allow you to both build logic and customize the visual layer. Now in Marketing Cloud, you'll notice that actually the proprietary languages and skills that you learn in Salesforce Core actually don't translate into Marketing Cloud. So although, there are definitely some crossover pieces in terms of SOCL and SQL, they are subtly different. But in order to manipulate data in Marketing Cloud, you need SQL skills. And then we don't really have the concept of, a separate logic language or a visual language. Within Marketing Cloud, you have AmpScript, which is a proprietary language related to the tool, which is loosely based on JavaScript, which allows you to do both data manipulation and visual manipulation in emails. You've got SSJS, so that's server-side JavaScript, which again, you are able to do similar sorts of things, although there are some things you can do in AmpScript that you can't do in JavaScript. And with both languages, there are some cases where it's more appropriate to apply one rather than the other, depending on the application. And then we've also got guided template language, which allows you to create quite sophisticated email templates, but with relatively limited amounts of code. And then overall, you've got the front end skills, which again is your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that area now is really the only area where you would see significant crossover between the two platforms. And it's worth noting that, front end development and developing for email and the scripting within email is subtly different for just general websites, because they're depending on the rendering of the email. There are some functions that are available and that some that aren't. But this is just to create some general awareness that you may have a number of different skills in Salesforce Core, but actually you'll need to learn some different skills in order to truly master Marketing Cloud. So let's step into a bit more detail about data management and automation. So in terms of data modeling, again, I've picked out 6 areas here, specifically around Marketing Cloud, to be aware of. So unique to Marketing Cloud is the all subscribers table. Now this is predominantly around email. And this table is the master list that contains all the people that have received emails and keeps a track of whether they have subscribed, unsubscribed, or whether there has been a delivery issue, i.e. that they've bounced. And this is the table within Marketing Cloud that controls whether emails get sent to a person or not. So this is very fundamental to the tool, and particularly around compliance. And we don't have the same concept in Salesforce Core. And then I also briefly wanted to talk about normalized and denormalized data. So these concepts mean that, in a normalized setting, that all the data is separated out and related to the attributes of those data are related to the entities. So for example, you would put all the account information on the account object. You would put all the contact information on the contact object. You wouldn't necessarily create account fields on a contact object, because then you've got to go through and update them on every account. So that's reviewing your data, understanding exactly where it should be stored and what it relates to, putting it in that one place and making sure that it's only repeated once in the system, and then creating relationships so that you can navigate to that data, which gives you the best chance of preserving data integrity. Now, we also have that concept in Marketing Cloud. And when you're building up the contact model and relating, various pieces of data, like what someone might have purchased, you relate that all to the contact, right? So you would create that relationship, you would store that in one place. But in addition to that, in Marketing Cloud, what you might also be doing is creating audience lists. Right? So that means that you're looking at that data at a snapshot in time and saying, on a Wednesday, this person bought this piece of clothing, and because they bought this piece of clothing, I'm going to separate them out. I'm going to put them in this separate list, and I'm going to send this email to them. And within Marketing Cloud, we do that a lot, and we create lots of different data extensions which power journeys, emails, mobile messaging, and they also reside in the system. So what it means is that a person's personal identifiable information can be both in the active contact model, but it can be repeated in multiple different places in multiple different audience lists, which means that the volume of data in Marketing Cloud can increase quite significantly. But equally, that when we're thinking about things like compliance, it can mean that actually that piece of data can exist in multiple tables for very valid reasons. But this is, again, a departure from Salesforce, where you would never knowingly have this piece of data existing more than once. So I also just mentioned about high volumes of data. So this can mean that because as part of Marketing Cloud and creating journeys, you might create multiple data extensions, one for each email, that you can have large volumes of data in the system, significantly more data than you would perhaps then individually see in your connected Salesforce instance. So these large volumes of data require people to be able to go in, understand, and then manipulate them. But they also mean that you need a good data retention policy, and you need to have a good understanding of, what data you've been taking, what copies of that data or snapshots of that data you've been taking over time, and then how you periodically look to remove that. Otherwise, your Marketing Cloud instance can become very full. Well, there can be a lot of data in it very quickly. Now, within Marketing Cloud, it doesn't have the same payment model, in the sense that if you have, it acknowledges that these large swathes of data are going to exist. So you are not additionally charged specifically for the volume of data that you have, but you do want to keep a track of that and keep that to the lowest minimum possible, because one, you want to be able to manage your compliance obligations, and two, you want to make it easy for your users to be able to go in, use, and see the system. So a connecting point is really that you would expect to have data duplication within Marketing Cloud, which is completely alien to anybody that works in Service Cloud or Sales Cloud, because in there you're specifically looking to minimize the level of duplication. But it is a viable use case within Marketing Cloud to have types of data repeated multiple times. Another area that can be a little bit of a transition is that you actually don't have the concept of global search in Marketing Cloud. So if you wanted to find out every instance of that piece of data, there is no inherent search that you can do in the system to find that. And therefore, that is why it's really important to have a data retention policy. And finally, I just want to highlight that actually we don't have the same type of relationships between objects. So within Salesforce, you create either a master detail or a lookup relationship between objects, and those persist, right? And they define how you can report on the data and how you navigate through the data and how you can query the data. Whereas within Marketing Cloud, all the data extensions are effectively individual tables, and you choose to join those in any way that you see fit using SQL queries. And therefore, you have a lot of flexibility in how you can join that data together, as long as you have at least one common field which you can join on. It gives a great deal of flexibility, which is really powerful, but it does mean that you actually need to have a greater understanding of how to write SQL queries. And therefore, that is quite a fundamental tool for admins. So let's briefly touch on data security and access for that and how that differs. So in the same, like the common things between the tools are that there are, everybody has a named user login. You can implement multi-factor authentication, both have the options of encryption, both have the options of single sign-on, and again, you can whitelist IPs so that people can only join or log into the system from various locations. Now, in Salesforce, we'll be very used to having data visibility controls, and they actually can become very granular. So you can control who can access what objects, you can control down to the field what fields various users can see, and also down to the row through the sharing. So you can restrict access to data quite significantly. Plus, you can also add on the Salesforce Shield tool, which not only provides encryption, but also a level of monitoring to be able to understand what people are doing in the system. Now, within Marketing Cloud, again, this is quite different. So we don't have the concept of objects and we don't have the concept of profiles. Therefore, you can't control data down to a field level level of access. So here, it's all about thinking about the folder structure. And then actually the restriction is purely more on which sort of business units or which areas of the system a person can actually access. And if they can access those areas of the system, then they can see all the data in that particular area. And, that's a very viable use case, because they should only really be in Marketing Cloud if they are building marketing automation at scale. They can typically also have access to all subscribers. Now, again, this can be turned on and off, but there is a question about how much that will limit what they can do and see within the system. So this is another reason why we have a lot fewer users in Marketing Cloud. And just to be very aware that when they are in the system, it is possible that they can see or have access to more data than they potentially would have done through their Salesforce login. In this instance, the key way to restrict that is to be very specific about the data that you bring into the system in the first place, and to be very considered about that. So you shouldn't bring any data into Marketing Cloud if there isn't a valid reason for it to be in the system. So you would never want to set up the connection and then just say, just bring in everything, because one, it goes out of date. Two, it's more data that people need to sort of wade through to understand. So the more that it's succinct with the data that's only the data required to perform the specific tasks, the easier it makes it for everyone to use. Now, again, Marketing Cloud does have the ability to encrypt data. This has to be turned on at a sort of environment level. Once it's on, you can't turn it off. And if you wanted to move away from the encryption functionality, you'd actually have to rebuild the org and all the functionality within it in a separate instance to be able to not be using encryption. And there are some limitations about what you can do once you've got encryption turned on. So it will encrypt the data that you've selected, which means that it can't be queried or filtered within the system, and that there are various things that you can't do. So you can't use encrypted data in mobile messaging. So it's very important that you're very clear on the use case that you have and the requirement for encryption before you implement it in Marketing Cloud. And I have been aware where organizations have actually gone down the road of purchasing encryption, but then in the end have chosen not to use it. Other options include tokenized sending. So if you have some very sensitive data that you don't want to be in Marketing Cloud, you can set up tokenized sending, which means that actually that data is pulled out of the system that you do have it stored in at the point of send, and therefore doesn't fully reside in Marketing Cloud, but can be available in the email messages that you send. And finally, we've got SSL certificates. So this is a means of keeping data safe as it transfers across the web. This is not something that comes as standard within the tool, but is a very common approach that organizations want to use to secure data, and therefore that's something that you'll want to also take a look at and make sure that you've set up. In terms of automation, so we've touched a little bit on this, but within Salesforce, you've got things like Process Builder and Flow. Whereas comparably in Marketing Cloud, you've got Journey Builder, which we've touched on before, and also Automation Studio. Now, Automation Studio is where you would do the majority of the automating of any data manipulation that you want to do. So any automated queries or preparing data in advance to create audience lists. And then programmatically, we've talked about this briefly. So from a programmatic point of view, and a logic point of view, you would use Apex or Lightning Web Components in Salesforce Core, whereas within Marketing Cloud, you would use AmpScript, SSJS, which is server-side JavaScript, GTL, also the guided template language, and also you have the ability to create custom activities within Journey Builder. An example of where you might use this is if you've got an external system that you want to bring data in from or check information for at the point that you are sending an email to a person, you can create a custom activity which will go out via the API, pull in that information, and then it's either used for logic about whether that should be sent or to add information to that message. So let's talk about some of the key processes here and how they differ. So within Salesforce, you'll be very familiar with lead generation, sales support processes, onboarding, that sort of thing. But with particularly in Marketing Cloud, we're looking at things like a campaign ideation process, the campaign delivery process, right? So that is very much more what you might use Journey Builder for to support that. You've got consent management. Consent is essential, and you would build components within Salesforce and within Marketing Cloud in order to be able to make sure that you are always observing people's consent. And then you've got transactional communications. So these behave, the difference is very subtle, but they're typically triggered possibly in a system outside Marketing Cloud, and then the delivery of the message goes through Marketing Cloud. So you want to be careful that you understand that process, the timing for that, the send classifications. And all of this is really within your overall communication strategy. But if you're not familiar with these types of processes and you haven't come across them before, then these are areas to look out for. Some of these that you would do specifically within the system, and some of them would exist outside the system. So your campaign ideation process might not actually be managed within Marketing Cloud, but the output from that would actually define what you need to build within the tool. And then if we come to, you know, one of the key components, which is key for Salesforce Core, but equally as core for Marketing Cloud, which is trust. And within Marketing Cloud, that particularly shows up as permission-based marketing, and also around delivery, right? So delivery, particularly around email. So as you can't not be aware, the level of regulation around communication and data has increased significantly over the last number of years. And according to the United Nations Conference and Trade on Development, over 66% of nations have data privacy regulation, and it's only increasing, right? So being compliant is not only a legal obligation, but it's what customers expect. And anybody that's not working with that will suffer, in the sense that potential customers won't necessarily want to deal with them. So it's really important that if you start working with Marketing Cloud, and particularly if you're the admin within the system, then you need to be very aware of the regulations that apply within the area that you're in. So I've called out a couple here, which is obviously GDPR. So I'm based in Europe and I'm very familiar with that. But then we're also finding in the US and lots of other regions that other regulation is coming online. So it's really, really essential that you and the team that are working on marketing automation are really familiar with this legislation and what is and isn't appropriate. But at the heart of any of this, there's clearly compliance, but it's really like, why are you trying to communicate with your customers, and what are you trying to achieve with that? And in most cases, it's looking to deepen the relationship. So you are looking to build trust with the people that you're communicating with. And through building trust, you want them to provide you with a little bit more information, maybe a little bit more permission to communicate with them. And based on that, you will then tailor the communications that you make to them, being respectful of their time and being empathetic. So we have these tools so that we can actually operate at scale, but still have meaningful sort of one-to-one interaction. So in order to do this and sort of develop that relationship and a communication strategy that supports that, it's really important to understand, your customers' personas, like who are they, what do they want, to develop a strategy that really supports that, to use the channels and meet them where they are. So although, you might want to send a lot of SMS messages to someone, is that really where, your audience is, and how will they respond if you do that? And also really respecting their communication preferences. So if someone says that they don't want to hear from you, or they want to reduce the number of communications, or they want to hear more from you, but on a specific topic, then it's really important that you actually look to fulfill that and build that trust over a longer term. So with email, there's a particular function in an area that's of interest, which is deliverability. And I've highlighted here 3 areas. Now, again, these are very well covered on the Trailhead, but they're areas that you need to specifically be aware of. So within the product setup, there is the concept of the sender authentication pack, which is effectively sort of a branding tool within Marketing Cloud, which gives, a unique custom domain URL that goes in your email, so it appears that your images come from there, but it also lets the email service providers know that this email is being sent on behalf of this organization, and that allows them to trust the email and then deliver it to the inbox, knowing that it is a piece of communication that the person will want to see. The next one is actually an activity. So if you have a dedicated IP address, then when you start using Marketing Cloud, you need to warm that up. So that will be an IP address that the internet service providers are not familiar with, and they will naturally be skeptical about what the purpose is and why you are trying to send. So you need to build a rapport with them effectively and a reputation with them, which allows them to feel confident that if they let those emails into the inboxes, that they will be welcome and well received. So this typically takes like over 30 days, is something that you need to plan very carefully. Instructions on how to detail this are in the Trailhead. So if you find yourself in this situation, I definitely recommend that you read that. And then just to highlight that deliverability is an ongoing activity. So just like with adoption with Salesforce Core, an admin needs to keep an eye on deliverability and the sender reputation of their Marketing Cloud IP domain, to make sure that, you know, again, over time, the messages are being delivered into the inbox that they want them to. And if you don't do that, then you risk, you know, having additional bounces. And you can have the best messaging and the best looking emails in the world, but if they aren't getting to the people that you want them to get to, you're not going to get the results that you're after. So here are some links to some of the trails that give you a bit more information on here. And these will be available, and I'll make the slides available. So yeah, as you can see, there are lots of different links available here. Now, just to finish off, I've listed out here some additional resources. These are some of the things that I've created over time. So most recently, I wrote a blog and also appeared at Check Dreaming with a session which was all about Marketing Cloud resources. So if you're interested in finding out more, then these two top ones are really interesting to take a look at, because it's a, you know, it's a very intense list of resources that you could go and find out a lot more about Marketing Cloud. And then the others here are a number of other sessions or blog posts that I've created over time, which looks to sort of introduce people and start them on their Marketing Cloud journey. So I hope that you found this useful. And if you have any questions, you can either reach out to me on Twitter or potentially drop them in the chat here, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. Thank you.